Shock.
Shocking.
I don't think I could sit down right now.
You mean
Historic, astounding, shocking.
It's a word that's come up a lot since November, for obvious reasons.
He's going to inject a shock to the system.
Now, I've spent a lot of time thinking about shock. 10 years ago, I published The Shock Doctrine, an investigation that spanned 4 decades from Pinochet's US-backed coup in 1970s Chile to Hurricane Katrina in 2005. I noticed a brutal and recurring tactic by right-wing governments. After a shocking event, a war, a coup, a terrorist attack, market crash, or natural disaster, exploit the public's disorientation, suspend democracy, push through radical policies that enrich the 1% at the expense of the poor and middle class.
This is a repeal and a replace of Obamacare.
We are going to cut taxes and simplify the tax code.
The United States will withdraw from the Paris Climate Accord.
Now, some people have said that's exactly what Trump has been trying to do. Is it true? Well, sort of, but in all likelihood, the worst is yet to come, and we'd better be ready. The administration is creating chaos daily.
Breaking news. Donald Trump's national security advisor Michael Flynn has resigned tonight.
All of a sudden, the White House is concerned about James Comey's handling of Hillary Clinton's email.
a Senate committee will question President Trump's son-in-law and senior advisor, Jared Kushner, about his meeting with officials from a Russian bank.
Now, of course, many of the scandals are the result of the president's ignorance and blunders, not some nefarious strategy. But there's also no doubt that some savvy people around Trump are using the daily shocks as cover to advance wildly pro-corporate policies that bear little resemblance to what Trump pledged on the campaign trail.
Save Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security.
The White House released its budget for 2018, and among the $4 trillion in cuts it proposes are billions upon billions of dollars slashed from both Medicaid and Social Security.
And the worst part? This is likely just the warm-up. We need to focus on what this administration will do when it has a major external shock to exploit. Maybe it'll be an economic crash like 2008. Maybe a natural disaster like Sandy. Or maybe it'll be a horrific terrorist event like Manchester or Paris in 2015. Any one such crisis could redraw the political map overnight, and it could give Trump and his crew free rein to ram through their most extreme ideas. But here is one thing I've learned over 2 decades of reporting from dozens of crises around the world. These tactics can be resisted. And for your convenience, I've tried to boil it down to a 5-step plan. Step 1, know what's coming. What would happen if a horror like the one in Manchester took place on US soil? Based on Trump's obvious fondness for authoritarianism, we can expect him to impose some sort of state of exception or emergency, where the usual rules of democracy no longer apply. Protests and strikes that block roads and airports, like the ones that sprung up to resist the Muslim travel ban, would likely be declared a threat to national security. Protest organizers would be targeted under anti-terror legislation, with surveillance, arrests, and imprisonment. With public signs of dissent suppressed, the truly toxic to-do list would quickly bubble up. Bring in the feds to pacify the streets. Muzzle investigative journalism. You know he's itching to.
You weren't called. Sit down.
The courts, who Trump would inevitably blame for the attacks, might well lose their courage. And the most lethal shock we need to prepare for? A push for a full-blown foreign war. And no, it won't matter if the target has no connection to the attacks used to justify it.
What did Iraq have to do with what? The attack on the World Trade Center. Nothing.
Preparing for all this is crucial. If we know what to expect, we won't be that shocked. We'll just be pissed, and that's important for step 2. Get out of your home and defy the bans. When governments tell people to stay in their homes or show their patriotism by going shopping, they inevitably claim it's for public safety, that protests and rallies could become targets for more attacks. What we know from other countries is that there is only one way to respond.
Hundreds of Tunisians have been defying the curfew in the capital Tunis.
Disobey en masse. That's what happened in Argentina in 2001. With the country in economic freefall, the president at the time declared a state of siege, giving himself the power to suspend the Constitution.
Decretado el estado de sitio en todo el territorio nacional.
He told the public to stay in their houses. Here's what they did instead. The president resigned that night, and eventually new elections were held. 3 years later, in Madrid, a horrifying series of coordinated attacks on trains killed more than 200 people. The prime minister, José María Aznar, falsely pointed the finger at Basque separatists and also used the attacks to justify his decision to send troops to Iraq. His rhetoric was classic shock doctrine: division, war, fear, daddy will protect you. This is how Spaniards responded. They voted out Aznar a few days later. Many people said they did it because he reminded them of Franco, Spain's former dictator. Which brings us to step 3, know your history. Throughout U.S. history, national crises have been used to suspend constitutional protections and attack basic rights. After the Civil War, with the nation in crisis, the promise of 40 acres and a mule to freed slaves was promptly betrayed. In the midst of the pain and panic of the Great Depression, as many as 2 million people of Mexican descent were expelled from the United States. After the Pearl Harbor attacks, around 120,000 Japanese Americans were jailed in internment camps. If an attack on U.S. soil were perpetrated by people who were not white and Christian, we can be pretty damn sure that racists would have a field day. And the good folks of Manchester recently showed us how to respond to that.
People in Manchester don't stand with your xenophobia and racism.
Something else we know from history. Step 4, always follow the money. While everyone is focused on security and civil liberties, Trump's cabinet of billionaires will try to quietly push through even more extreme measures to enrich themselves and their class, like dismantling Social Security or auctioning off major pieces of government for profit.
Today we're proposing to take American air travel into the future.
It's in those moments when fear and chaos are sucking up all the oxygen when we most have to ask, whose interests are being served by the chaos? What is being slipped through while we're distracted? Who's getting richer? And who's getting even poorer?
When the floodwaters were still rising in New Orleans, one of the first official acts that the governor did was to fire all the teachers. What's happening is a raid of the money set aside for public education to be given to private companies. It wasn't by happenstance, it was by design. You saw the political manipulations and taking advantage of the crisis.
But if we learn from this history, we could actually make history with step 5, advance a bold counterplan. At their best, all the previous steps can only slow down attempts to exploit crisis. If we actually want to defeat this tactic, opponents of the shock doctrine need to move quickly to put forward a credible alternate plan. It needs to get at the root of why these sorts of crises are hitting us with ever greater frequency. And that means we have to talk about militarism, climate change, and deregulated markets. More than that, we need to advance and fight for different models, ones grounded in racial, economic, and gender justice, ones that hold out the credible promise of a tangibly better and fairer life in the here and now, and a safer planet for all of us in the long term. Defensive actions alone won't cut it. There has to be a different vision, and it needs to be bold. Saying no to the shock doctrine is vitally important. But when the shit hits the fan, no is not enough.